Percy with an early run, he's onside this time! It's 1-1! Andre Schürrle, it's 7! It's Mario Götze! What a goal! What a goal to win a World Cup!
Welcome to the Beermat World Cup podcast. We are at the stage where games are at premium, so we have to make the most of them, and it genuinely is upsetting that we don't have football 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but you know, we can watch replays and enjoy ourselves otherwise. Are there other ways to enjoy yourselves other than football? We'll figure it out. Today's quarterfinals were a running theme in terms of what your ambition is versus your quality and what you do with the difference in that. And there's no way of sort of getting both games in a group. We have to take them in isolation. First up was France 2, Uruguay 0. And genuinely speaking, I've spoken about Uruguay before. I am a big fan of the way Uruguay play their football. They are very honest, they are very decisive, they are very sort of defensive. Yes, that being the case, and in most cases you don't necessarily sort of jump on the idea of a defensive side being a good side that you want to watch. But Uruguay seem to have this sort of, I don't know, honesty I think is the wrong word, but you know it's very much them. And you figured, or at least I figured, you play against France, this idea of they'll contain, France will try and attack, they'll be able to beat them on the break. The Cavani thing does hurt them massively. Not including him in the starting lineup because he couldn't train within 48 hours, so he couldn't play. I wonder whether you could have relaxed that, but at the end of the day, he didn't come on at all. So realistically speaking, he couldn't have played 45, he couldn't have played the full 90, but there's always going to be that nagging feeling of like, what would have happened had he started? What would have happened had he come on? What would have happened had he played 20 minutes? I've said this before, if you're going to play Uruguay, if you're going to set up against a side like that, then you have to sort of expect you're going to get some sort of damage. You're going to have to expect you're going to get some sort of, I don't know, wounds. In terms of the fighting metaphor, you're going to play against the Uruguay side and you're going to come away unscathed. I don't see that. I don't see how that's possible. And not only did France do that, France came away so unscathed, it became very much a case of how good France are, but a case of how bad Uruguay are, because I'm still not given the credit. And I don't care what that may entail, but they're in the semi-finals and I've no idea whether they're any good or not. What I do know is, what transpired today was a very placid, almost nothing game, and yes, I will give them the credit for containing and just being able to keep Uruguay at arm's length, because let's face it, there aren't many sides that can nullify them in such a way that you realise, oh right, these aren't very good. We saw it, like Portugal are the European champions, quote unquote, and they had no shot. There were moments in the game, but like Cavani did it, and maybe the absence of Cavani in this game is sort of what does for them, but there's no real excuse for that performance, I would say. France move forward and they look, I don't know, like they've not really played in 90 minutes yet. Uruguay bow out, and the one thing I do want to mention is the man that's crying at the end of the game and the amount of sort of abuse that's been hammered on him. Just leave that fucking alone, man. It's a human response. This whole idea of like the masculine, you're not allowed to share anything, you're not allowed to do anything. Like Uruguay and most South American countries in general, they're a very passionate nation. They're allowed to sort of express their feelings in that way. And if your man wants to sort of shed a tear like while the game's going on, it's 2-0 with 5 to go. Like, why the fuck not? I've got no qualms about it. I'm not going to kick off about it and say he's terrible. Yes, you would say, why don't you channel that energy into getting a goal at the other side of the pitch? But like, that feels very sort of, not selective, just you've no real idea of how he feels in that moment, and it's bullshit to sort of go, no, he shouldn't do that. He does what he does. And much the same way that like a game goes the way it goes, whether you have heroes and villains, and I'm going to get to a villain in a second, just if someone wants to have that emotional response to what's transpired, then let them. And then that emotional response obviously is triggered from the second goal, which is Muslera parrying it in, very much Carrier seeing it in, I believe is the collective noun. disappointing, it's horrible, it's upsetting. And I say that just because it reminds me of what happened in the Champions League final. But it's football. I do wonder whether this is a sort of, not even a new trend necessarily, but just you got lads that are really good with technique, blamming it in from all sorts of angles, with all sorts of different conditions and all sorts of different balls. I'm not suggesting we should accept the fact that goalies just let it in like this, because this is terrible. This is terrible. But I just feel for him at the end of the day. It's awful. It's so bad. There's no defending it. But I am empathetic, especially given what happened in the summer. I am empathetic is the word. I feel for him is the sort of my own personal view in that regard. Next up, wow. Talking about results that were expected and sort of ground to a halt versus a result that wasn't expected. It went actually very, very similar in terms of the France-Uruguay game, but it was the flip reverse. The underdogs took the lead. The underdogs had control, and it was all about whether the pressure would tell, because at no point were France under the cosh, under the idea of, like, we saw what happened against Argentina. If Uruguay had got one late on, what would have happened? Would it have been tense? Would they have seen it out comfortably? This, that, the other. There's so many unanswered questions, and that sort of lends itself to how Uruguay actually performed. In terms of the Belgium-Brazil game, Belgium take the lead. Very fortunate. Very scrapper. But from then on, that first half, Belgium could race away with this, and there are quite a few times in this game where you think, oh shit, Belgium are going to race away with this, and then once Brazil score, Brazil are the quote-unquote better side, and you do start to wonder, if not convince yourself, that Brazil are definitely going to, like, get back in this, if not win this, and sort of take it into extra time. And a very sort of football has already written this before a ball has been kicked sort of sense. That was not the case. Belgium I've slagged off for a lot of this tournament. Belgium I've still, again, much like France actually, I've no real idea if they're any good. They're better than I think they are. I think the gap between where Belgium are versus my opinion is bigger than the gap between where France are and my opinion of them. That feels like it's an awful compliment. It's probably not a compliment, but the matchup between these two is actually really tasty in a semi-final. As things like went on, why Firmino? Firmino comes on, they get the goal. I've said it before, I've said it again, like, he should be there well in advance of all of this. And Neymar, there's a few VAR calls or potential VAR calls that could have brought them back in this. At the end of the day, one of, if not the favourite, is going out, and Belgium are going through. And we have one semi-final lined up. Tomorrow we're going to get the other semi-final lined up. Whether or not the excitement will amplify as much as everyone thinks, we're going to wait to see, because let's face it, the excitement, realistically speaking, in terms of revving the meter, it's not stopped yet.